Bayonet charges claimed dozens of workers' lives. For newcomers, the American dream often turned into one long nightmare.
The common story of immigrant anarchists, be they German or Jewish or Italian, they are either skilled workers who can only find unskilled employment, or unskilled workers who can only find the most demeaning of work. So they become disillusioned with the economic opportunities available to them. They become disillusioned with the political system, which they know vaguely is supposed to be democratic and Republican, but which they find in this time period is dominated by corruption, by corporate power. And some of these disillusioned immigrants then encounter radical ideas.
This encounter with radical ideas occurred notably in Chicago, a city that immigrants flooded into. Steel, concrete, and the meat industry needed manpower. Plagued with a rising mafia and the pay of the all-powerful industrialists, the city was overflowing with segregated workers, prostitutes, and street children. It was fast becoming the home of protest.
Chicago was the center of anarchist activity in the United States in the 1880s.
It was a city in which labor relations were pretty harsh. There was basically no room for negotiation, no room for compromise. So there really was a situation, the stark situation in which you had the workers often living in unbelievably harsh conditions, and a local ruling class, a local business elite that was not prepared to make any concessions whatsoever towards them.
Inspired by the new anarchist strategy, in 1886, on May 1st, then just a day like any other, a general strike was called. 340,000 workers gathered to demand an 8-hour day. The police broke up the demonstration forcefully. Walls became covered with calls for revenge. 2 days later, the anarchists organized a protest in Haymarket Square. The event was to become a key moment in the history of the workers' movement.
Few of the leading anarchists of the city spoke against what had happened. And during that demonstration, the police arrived in force. And at some point in that night, the police moved in to try and clear the demonstration.
Somebody threw a homemade bomb at the police. It exploded, killing and injuring several officers who then opened fire on the crowd.
A few people were killed. There was a shootout. Police pulled out their guns and started shooting at people. And some of the people in the crowd, including, I'm sure, some anarchists, had come armed. And to this day, of course, Americans like to carry weapons around with them. The authorities decided that the anarchists were to blame, even though they didn't have any hard evidence.
The Chicago police rounded up dozens of anarchists and arrested anarchists who they blamed for the event, blamed for the bombing, one of whom had never been there, two of whom had never even been at the demonstration that night. So this was seen as, in some ways, was the classic example of reactionary forces within a particular city, Chicago in this case, using an event like this to justify an exemplary act of repression.
8 anarchists were accused of throwing the bomb. In his plea, the prosecutor hinted at their innocence.
We know that these 8 men are no guiltier than the thousands who follow them, but they've been singled out because they are leaders. Gentlemen of the jury, make an example of them. Hang them, and you will be saving our institutions and our society.
Of the 8, 5 were sentenced to death. Louis Ling committed suicide in prison. The other 4, August Spies, George Engel, Adolf Fischer, and Albert Parsons, were hanged.
It was only in 1893 that the governor of Illinois actually pardoned all the anarchists who had been hanged, and he actually blamed the police for it. He particularly blamed the police chief of Chicago, saying that he had organized the whole thing and that he may well have even been responsible for perpetrating this bombing.
This generated enormous outrage, not only among anarchists, but even liberal-minded people, because the trial had been so unfair. As a result of the Haymarket martyrs being executed, they became folk heroes, not only among the anarchists, but among socialists all over the world. And so you would see their portraits in trade union offices in England and France and Latin America.
As a result of the global impact of the Haymarket Affair, May the 1st was adopted as International Workers' Day. In the years that followed, demonstrations led by anarchists were held everywhere.